Hidden beneath the quiet countryside of Fife lies a relic of a very different Britain. A place built during an age of secrecy, suspicion, and the constant possibility of nuclear war. This is RAF Troywood. Today, very little on the surface suggests the importance this place once held. But beneath the ground lies a Cold War bunker designed for a world preparing for the unthinkable. The Second World War was over, but peace had brought a new confrontation. The Soviet Union and the Western powers were becoming increasingly divided. Nuclear weapons had changed warfare forever, and Britain suddenly faced a threat unlike anything it had experienced before. An enemy aircraft carrying a nuclear weapon could potentially reach British cities with devastating consequences. Britain needed to know what was approaching, and it needed to know quickly. Across the country, a network of heavily protected radar stations and command centers began to appear. The system was known as ROTOR. Royal Air Force Troywood became part of that secret network. Built in the early 1950s, Troywood was constructed largely out of sight. Above ground, the site was deliberately unremarkable. Underground was another matter. Behind heavy doors and thick concrete were operations rooms, communications equipment, offices, and the infrastructure required to keep the bunker functioning. The people working here were part of a much larger system watching Britain's skies. Information gathered by radar stations could be assessed, plotted, and communicated through the air defense network. During the Cold War, information meant time. And in a nuclear confrontation, time could be measured in minutes. But technology moved quickly. The aircraft, weapons, and tactics Troywood had been designed around continued to change. Radar improved. Missiles became increasingly important. Britain's early Cold War defense network evolved with them, and Troywood's role changed. The bunker later became associated with Britain's preparations for surviving and responding to a nuclear attack. The emphasis was no longer simply upon detecting an approaching enemy. It was also about what happened afterwards. The prospect facing Britain was almost impossible to comprehend. A major nuclear exchange could destroy cities, communications, and essential infrastructure within minutes. Those who survived the initial explosions would then face radioactive fallout. Government planners needed some means of understanding what was happening across the country. Radiation levels would have to be measured. Reports would have to be collected. Messages would have to travel through whatever communications network remained. Places such as Troywood formed part of that hidden world of Cold War civil defense. Inside were communications facilities, working areas, and equipment intended to function during circumstances most people hoped would never occur. There were provisions for those expected to remain underground. There was even provision for broadcasting information. Everything reflected the extraordinary question being asked at the time: how do you continue to operate after a nuclear war? It is easy to look at a bunker as simply concrete, steel, and machinery. But people would have had to work here. If the worst had happened, the doors could have been closed with a devastated world outside. Those inside would have depended upon the bunker around them. Ventilation, electricity, communications, food, water. Every ordinary requirement of life suddenly became part of the machinery of survival. And above them might have been a landscape contaminated by radioactive fallout. The psychological reality of that is perhaps harder to imagine than the bunker itself. For decades, Britain lived beneath the shadow of nuclear confrontation. Exercises were held, warnings were tested, bunkers were maintained, plans were written for circumstances nobody truly wanted to experience. And then, gradually, the political landscape changed. The Berlin Wall fell in 1989. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. The Cold War that had shaped Europe for more than 4 decades was effectively over. Troywood had survived the period it had been built for. Thankfully, it had never been required to perform its ultimate purpose. The site was eventually decommissioned in the early 1990s. But Troywood did not disappear. The concrete remained, the corridors remained. Rooms once connected to Britain's Cold War defence system survived beneath the ground. And for a time, the bunker entered another chapter of its history. It became a museum. Visitors could descend underground and see something normally hidden from public view. Not a reconstruction of the Cold War, but part of the infrastructure actually built because governments genuinely believed nuclear war was possible. Today, Royal Air Force Troywood is a remarkable survivor. Its corridors belong to a period that can already seem strangely distant. Old communications rooms, heavy doors, concrete passageways, spaces designed around plans for a nuclear emergency. Yet when these rooms were constructed, the threat was anything but historical. The people who worked here lived in a world where nuclear war was considered a genuine possibility. That is perhaps what makes places like Troywood so important. They allow us to see the Cold War not through politicians, speeches, or military parades, but through the physical preparations made for what might happen if diplomacy failed. Royal Air Force Troywood was built for a war that never came, and that may be the most important part of its story. For decades, people worked behind these walls preparing for a day they hoped would never arrive: a nuclear attack on Britain. Today, the equipment is silent. The telephones no longer ring. The operations rooms no longer receive reports. And beyond the heavy doors, the world carried on. Troywood remains beneath the Scottish countryside, a concrete reminder of an age when civilization prepared itself for its own destruction, and of a Cold War that thankfully remained cold. Thank you for watching.